Welcome to the 22nd common session of Sunoikisis's Digital Classics 2017. Today we have a session about reading and visualizing geo-annotated data. We apologize for the delay, but there is a technical problem and I think we have a missing guest today, so we decided to start a few minutes later, but we are here today as usual. So today we have three guests. The first one who's going to talk is Valeria Vitale from King's College London. Then we have Chiara Palladino from the University of Leipzig and the University of Bari, and hopefully in the end also Marcel Mernitz from the University of Leipzig. Today we have again a session about geo-annotation. I say again because if you remember we started the beginning of the semester 22 weeks ago with geo-annotation, and today again we go back to this important topic, but of course with new things. And our guests are going to talk about data, specifically data, and formats, data formats, and other reflections on this important topic. So, welcome to our guests, and thank you for your contribution to Sunoikisis. And I think we can start with Valeria from London.
Thank you, Monica. I can hear, okay, I don't need feedback anymore. Thank you. Just if you allow me a very quick correction, I'm not based at King's College, but the Institute of Classical Studies in London. That's okay.
We have to correct the class outline. There is a mistake. I apologize for that.
It's all right, no problems. Today's class will be not only about geo-annotation, but it will have a specific focus on the visualization of geographic data. And we will be presenting some specific applications, some specific example in research context if our colleague Marcel manages to join the session, and we will see some of the applications of a tool that we have discussed in one of our previous sessions, as Monica was reminding us, the session on geo-annotation and specifically on the Recogito tool developed by Pelagios Commons. But what I'm going to talk about today is actually how to visualize and how to analyze some of the data that are produced through tools like the one that Marcel is going to talk about, which is Recogito. So I will screen share with you to see my slides. And okay, so what I am going to talk about is a particular kind of geodata, which is linked geodata, like the kind of data that are produced when using the annotation tool Recogito. And to do so, to talk about visualization of linked geodata, I will use another tool that has been developed by the Pelagios Commons that is called Peripleo, which is our visualization and exploration in a Y engine. And I will give you a brief overview of how Peripleo works, how it can be used, and how it can be, let's say, useful to academic research. So the biggest added value of linked open data is, well, unsurprisingly, the fact of being linked or being connected, which enables us to perform searches and queries that go way beyond the limits of our own single specific project. And this is not just a gain in terms of sheer quantity, but it is also an enormous gain in terms of relationships, in terms of semantic relationship that can be discovered, can be established between the links. So Peripleo is a tool, it's an online tool to explore linked open data and to represent them and some of their relationship in a map-based visualization. Peripleo is a completely free tool and can be found on the Pelagios Commons website. This is a screenshot of the Pelagios Commons website. And if you go to Explore Data, you'll find Search Peripleo in the drop-down menu, and you will reach the Peripleo API. For the sake of clarity and transparency, I want to say that the version of Peripleo that you find here on the Pelagios Commons website is the current version of Peripleo, but there is another version that we call Peripleo 2 that is currently under development. And Peripleo 2 does have some new, very interesting features that I would like to present and discuss with you. But it is, at the moment, less stable than the first Peripleo. Also, not all the features and not all the data in Peripleo 1 have been already transferred to Peripleo 2. So for this demo, I will use examples from both the visualization engines, and I will give you both links, so you will be free to play with both and see the differences. But for the end of summer, there will be only one version. It will be the new version with all the new shiny features, but also with all the old ones that we liked and we wanted to preserve. So let's say that in an ideal world, linked open data just simply connect to each other according to their common references, of course, and this would be, this would be just a dream. Unfortunately, we know that in the real world, in our actual academic experience, things tend to be a little bit more complicated than that, and they usually require a number of intermediate steps and a certain level of curation, and usually this includes a common interchange format. So what Peripleo offers to its users is the possibility to search within a pool of data coming from a number of curated sources. So we have selected and we have made compatible to each other a number of, let's say, data sources coming from different partners. And they have been ingested into Peripleo, and they can be searched. And these kind of sources are various and of different natures, and they can go from gazetteers like Pelagios to databases like the Epigraphic Heidelberg database or the Deutsche Archaeological Institute, and so on. And this let's say, curated network of resources about the ancient world can be entered and searched and traveled in many ways. You can enter looking for places, you can enter looking for documents, you can enter looking for keywords, but what is, I think, important for Peripleo is that it is not meant to be something that you just go and you look for the one thing that you need. It's not just a way to find quickly what you're interested in. It's more a way to invite the user to travel, to discover, to find, okay, there is these other resources I didn't know about that is somehow related to what I was actually interested about. So to start from what you know to reach something that you didn't know before, but that might be interesting to you, or discover patterns, or discover distributions, or discover, I don't know, maybe even, you know, anomalies that might be interesting to investigate. So before we start, a brief simulated, this is going to be offline, simulated journey through Peripleo, I want to bring your attention to a few main points about how Peripleo works and how the information is structured. And the first concept is the one of record conflation. So every item in Peripleo, which could be either a place, a person, an object, a time period, and we'll talk more about this, is a collection of records that come from different linked open data sources, like we have seen, like Pelagios, or the Dare Digital Atlas of the Roman Empire, and so on. So, for example, the item Rome in Peripleo is an aggregation of the records that come from, different sources, as this this little data network shows information from Trismegistus and so on. And another point that we wanted to highlight is that the relationship between the results that you get in your queries and the dot that you see on the map is not necessarily a one-to-one relationship, because because one dot can represent many items, as well as one item can have many dots. And this is an example, for example, yes, it's an example of the connected locations of the itinerary on the Vicarello beakers, for example. Another couple things about how Peripleo works is in the new version, there is a unified data model for all items. So disregarding their nature of places or people or time periods, they all have the same structure. And previously, and in all the, let's say, heavily geographically based visualizations, places are somehow prominent, and that used to be the case for Peripleo as well, and that's because Pelagios actually has a history of a heavily geography-based project. So places were actually, in a way, more important, but definitely treated differently from objects, and they were stored in different places, and they had to be queried differently, and all objects had necessarily to link to places to be in the system. But now all items are equals, and they are differentiated just by their typology, so they have a type, and they can be connected in any ways. They don't necessarily have to have one connection with place. We can have objects related to people and so on. And this brings us to the last point, which is that compared to other systems that are really heavily focusing on the location, the actual GIS coordinates and where things and where places are, Peripleo is more of a focus of on the connections. And that is, despite being, somehow misleadingly, but a map-based visualization. I say misleadingly, but it's actually, the map visualization is great and it's very useful, but it does suggest a prominence of place that it's not true anymore in the data structure that we are pursuing. But now, enough talking about abstract things. Let's have a short trip through Peripleo. And for example, let's simulate our search for a place. Let's say that we want to search for Alexandria. So we write the name Alexandria here in the search box, and we get quite a few results, among which we have different different places that are all various Alexandrias in the world. And I'd say let's select the one that is the most common of interest, at least for classicists, which is Alexandria in Egypt. And we see that the items that are actually related to Alexandria in Egypt are 18,000 and something. So let's click on specifically these items, and we see that now we are filtering our results. This tag tells us that we are looking exactly at the results that are related to that specific Alexandria, and we have the number that we've seen before. We can also break them down according to the data sources, according to, theoretically, also according to the topics or the people or the periods involved. At the moment, Playo 2 is not yet populated with this information, but will be, especially for periods who are implementing Periodo, and we are implementing the integration of Periodo into Playo, and for people, we also have we are thinking about integrating people as well. And we have a time slide that also gives us the time span of all the results that we could also use for filter, as we'll see. But we could, for example, isolate only the results that come from a specific database, from a specific data source. So, for example, all the results in that specific Alexandria that come from finds.org, and the tags always helps us, understanding exactly where we are, and you see also that the time span changes a little bit. Or same thing for the UVA Art Museum or the University of Graz Quake collection, and you see that if we click on one of the items, we usually get a preview. If we're talking about an object, we usually get a preview, and it is also important to stress that in the preview of the record, we always have a link to the original record in the source database. So, for example, we can go back to the numismatic collection at the UVA or the Graz coin collection, and so on. We always have a link back to our data provider. But now let's simulate another kind of journey, a journey from a keyword that can be an object type, an amphora, or in our case, a tetradrachm. So if we type tetradrachm, we see a distribution. We see at a glance, how many results we have, which is quite a few. We see that we have at least we have two different sources, and we have this time span. And we can see on the map at a glance the distribution of the places that are related to tetradrachm. And let's talk a little bit more about the time slide that can help us select a specific period of interest. And in this case, it can, highlight quite strikingly, the differences in the distribution from an earlier period, for example, to a later period, and also see how the prominence of places, changes through time. But if we want to put, for example, focus only on one data source in the tetradrachm, we could click on, the breakdown by sources. And at this point, compared to the 22,000, I would say let's go for the 9 results in the UVA Art Museum collection results, so that it is more manageable. And now we can only see the tetradrachm that belong to that particular collection, and we can see how they relate to places, and we can see that there is one place that looks a little bit prominent, so probably has more results connected to it. So if we click on it, we find out that it is Amphipolis, and that there are other 3 results there. And that we could click on the first one, that is this tetradrachm of Philip II, that is in the collection that we have selected, and we can see that the time span for these few results, it's actually quite limited. It's quite specific, and okay, this was just a brief, let's say, guided tour through PerPleo, and the idea is that really a user enters and starts the search from one idea, one topic, one research interest, but then following the different links and following the different breakdown data can, actually go on and spend a little time in this, let's say, little curated, it's like a safari. I mean, it's not in the wild of linked open data. It's like, a guided safari, as much as, one may hate safaris in real life, but they might be useful in linked open data for the ancient world. And just a couple of things, I'm done. I want to mention a couple more things that will be implemented in the new version of PerPleo that is coming at the end of summer. And one is the a better way to visualize co-occurrence, for example, when two items, like when two places are related to the same object. So we will have, we will visualize the related places, and we will, I say will because it sounds really cool, but actually it's Rainer Simon in Austria, in Vienna, that is developing the new PerPleo. Rainer will implement and will perfect the possibility to search not only within the items, but also within the references, within the annotations that have been created about items or that connect items between them. And here you find a few links. The first one is the new version of PerPleo that is still, let's say, in an experimental state, but feel free to use it. And this is the GitHub with everything about the new PerPleo. And this is the current stable but soon to be deprecated version of the search engine. And I am ready to give the spotlight to Chiara.
All right.
Valeria, okay.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to show you some concrete options for the visualization of text. So since, yes, Marcel hasn't joined us, I will also do a brief introduction to the various data formats because those will be important for us. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, it's loading. Yes, there you go.
Okay, it works.
Okay, perfect. So the first thing that I think it's useful before we go into how we can visualize various geo-annotated texts, and if you don't know what geo-annotated means, then just please go to the previous session about geo-annotation that Valeria and I did for Sunoikisis, where we explained what geo-annotation is and how you can perform it in a very simple way by using an annotation tool that's called Recogito. That's one of the tools that the Pelagios Commons project provides you if you want to retrieve the geography of a source, of a textual source, or a map, an image that you are inspecting. So first of all, when you want to visualize your geotag data from a text into whatever GIS application that you may have or that you may experiment with, you need to be aware of the formats that those data take so that you can also choose the best one. And here I'm going to refer, I'm also doing a little bit of self-promotion. I'm going to refer to one of the little references that we wrote into the pedagogy working group for Pelagios Commons. It's a very short reference of scary DH terminology that includes a lot of geographical related, geospatial related terminology like, I don't know, GIS or vector data or raster data or anything that's that looks scary, but it's indeed just a technical expression. So the types of formats that we will refer to are basically the formats that Recogito allows you to have once you have done the geo-annotation process. And you can see them here in the export area. You will have a CSV format, you will have a JSON format or a GeoJSON format, which is a related one. And you are also going to have the KML format. And then, of course, you will always be able to download a TI XML serialization. I'm assuming that everyone here knows what TI is, so I will not explain that. But I will focus on the three options here that are more related to geospatial language. So the KML language is one of the most traditional ones. It's basically a markup language that's derived from XML, and it looks like this, as you can see in my slide. So it's basically an XML version that focuses on geographical coordinates and has very few additional tags for description, for further characterization of a place, a location, and so on. You can also have a GeoJSON format that's an adaptation of the JSON format. That's a JavaScript-based notation. And it is, once again, especially focused on geographical features. But a good point about GeoJSON is that it is much more flexible, and it allows you to describe a potentially unlimited number of features in every kind of geographical entity that you may be interested in describing. So it can have a very complex variety of characteristics and features. Another good point about GeoJSON is that it allows you a distinction between different types of geometry, which means that it allows you to represent places as points on a map, but it also allows you to represent places as spatial extensions if you have those kinds of data. So it may be quite useful to use if you are interested into things that are a bit more expanded than just points on the map. And then, of course, the most useful and at the same time easiest format, which is the CSV, which is the short for comma-separated values. And it's basically a text file. So it's really literally a TXT file that you can download and that you can open with various other programs that are made to visualize tabular format. So the actual textual format that it has is displayed here in my slide. So it's basically a succession of entities, names, content, basically values, that alternates with a delimiter that can be a semicolon, as in this case. It can be a comma, more usually it can be a tab, whatever. And when you open it into a program like Excel, for example, or Numbers, if you have Mac, it will display as a table. So it's basically a textual format that translates as a table. And we are going to use that into our application. So I am going to show you how to visualize geo-annotated text with a particular GIS application that's called QGIS. We chose this application because it's open source, of course. It's relatively intuitive for simple kinds of analysis from CSV or KML files. And it's also quite generalizable for various types of data. I have to say that it's obviously not the only application that you can use. Of course, it has some backwards. For example, it's an application that you have to download and install on your machine. And if your computer is not particularly powerful, if it's a Mac, it may be quite slow to use. So for the sake of completeness, I will also give you an overview of a web-based application that's called Carto.com. That's the new version for CartoDB, which is an application that many of you probably know, so that I can show you that there are actually alternatives. You're not bound to QGIS for any reason. So the first thing that you have to do, obviously, is to go to the QGIS.org website and download the application. Once you open it, it may take a while, but basically what you will see is this kind of interface. Obviously, you will need to open a new project by clicking on project, and it will just display to you the very empty page of the beginning. It's kind of an empty canvas that you have to fill in. So the first thing that you will need is a map layer, obviously. And to do that, you will need a specific plugin that's called the OpenLayers plugin. The plugins are basically for the applications that can be connected to QGIS for further types of analysis. And you can have very, very complex and detailed plugins there according to how complex is your data and what kind of analysis you want to do. So if you want to download the OpenLayers plugin, you have to click on plugins and go on manage and install. And it will show you this window where you can basically look up for OpenLayers in the search bar. And it will tell you whether you have it already, whether there's a new version available, as in my case, or whether you need to download it and install it. You can also have a look there, and there are always pretty detailed descriptions about what each plugin does. So if you're interested, I would recommend to have a look there and just try to download a few and try them out. So in order to activate the map, you will need to go to the drop-down menu that opens once you click on Web. And in Web, you will find the OpenLayers plugin if you have installed it correctly. And then you can basically look for, you can basically show which map you want to display. And the choice of the map really depends on you. There are a few different things that you can try. You can try them out and you can see which one is the best for you. I personally prefer satellite or physical maps because while working with historical data, it may be confusing to look at the modern political divisions of a political map, but it's really up to you. And of course, satellite maps always look cool. So once you click on a satellite map, this is what it opens for you. Of course, you can focus on a specific part of the map, on a specific layer, we would say. You can zoom in, zoom out. You can zoom in on the specific layer that you want to visualize and so on. And you can manipulate the image as far as you want. So the other thing that you would need, obviously, is the data. And for the exercise that we proposed for this section, we gave you a few options, a few predefined options that you can use if you don't have your own data. There is a very nice list of Roman amphitheaters, of located Roman amphitheaters that has been compiled by Sebastian Heath that you can download from GitHub, and it's a traditional CSV format. There is a mapping Spartacus project that was developed by Sarah Bond within Pelagios, and it provides you a list in KML format. Or there is a recent development in Trismegistos places that allows you to download in the same CSV format various epigraphical or papyrological sources that have geographical information in them. A very good example is the Antonine itinerary here that you can download following this link. Or obviously, you can work with your own data. So what you need to do is basically to add a layer. And you will click on layer, click on add layer. And what we're going to do is to add a delimited text layer. Because in this case, I decided to work with a CSV format, and a CSV format is a delimited text by excellence. So what it will do is to open for you this window of options, which may be a little bit confusing at the beginning. Remember that you can always hover your mouse over the various options, and it will provide you short explanations of each thing, basically. So, and another good thing about QGIS is that it's probably available for you in your own language. There is one in Italian, there is one in German, there is one in French, for example. So that's quite a good thing, I think. So you will have to, obviously, to browse and to upload your own particular text. And for this little experiment, I chose Roman amphitheaters of Sebastian. There is a few things that you need to pay attention to once you try to upload your file here. So the first thing is the file format. Of course, the file format is set automatically by the program once it recognizes the CSV file, but it can happen that according to the different separators and delimiters that the CSV file has, it doesn't recognize it. For example, this is another file, and this is a Recogito export. Because the CSV format in Recogito uses the semicolon, you will need to tell QGIS that there is a custom delimiter here, which will be the semicolon. So you will need to pay attention to that. And remember that there is a little preview here that will show you the tabular format if you're doing well, and will be completely messy if you're not. The other thing that you will need to pay a little bit of attention is the record options. The record options is basically the number of the header lines that you want to see in the preview, and the number of lines that you need to discard, because in the header of the CSV files, there is generally some information that is just useless for a particular purposes. And you can also set the first record has field names in order to see the little titles there. They are pretty much just the first line of the CSV file. Another very important thing, you will need to set the longitude and the latitude. You will need to set the longitude in the X field and the latitude in the Y field in order to have, let's say, the projection on a Cartesian view, basically. Once you click on OK, the further thing that you will need to do is to set a coordinate reference system. And for this kind of georeference data, we always use this particular one, which is the 4326 EPSG. And it will show you a lot of different options. You can filter them according to the number of the authority that you chose. Once you click on OK, what it will show you is a very basic view of all the points in your map. And you will see the name of your file in the layers panel. Once you've done that, you can dedicate yourself finally to the very funny part, trying different visualizations according to the kind of things that you want to do. And I should say that in this case, in the case of visualization of geospatial data, there is no golden rule for what you want to see, and there is no predefined workflow. The real lesson here is that you should know your data first. You should know what kinds of things you may be able to visualize, and you should know what you really want to do with those data before you can go to the fancy style options and try different kinds of things. So there may be very funny options, very articulated possibilities in visualizing these kind of things, but there also may be very elementary things, because typically historical data is not structured. So particularly with textual descriptions, it may happen that you will need to go a little bit further in the concept of those visualizations before you can obtain something that's really useful. And that's a necessary premise. So if you want to go on with the style, with the styling options, what you have to do is to double click on the little name of the file that you see on the layers panel. And you will be able to do a few things in terms of style immediately. The most obvious thing that you may want to do is to set the labels, obviously. So you will go on labels, and you will select the column that identifies the toponym or whatever you want to see basically displayed on the map. And you will also have some further styling options in terms of color, size, transparency, where it should be placed with respect to the points, and so on. And the output will be pretty much this. You see all the names. But this is not really what we want to do. We want to gather some cool visualization of the data here. Another nice option is to have a categorized style, which goes beyond the idea of labels. The categorized style basically allows you to choose different kinds of representations according to the type of data that you have. So for example, in the case of the Roman amphitheaters, it would be interesting to see categorized the different kinds of amphitheaters according to the province that they belong to. And to do this, you will need to set a categorized style, and you will need to choose the column that represents a province. Then you would click on classify. Once you click on classify, it will show you a little preview of all the values and the names for each province. And you will also be able to set the symbol for each value, the color, the size, whatever, depending again on what you want to give more focus on. And so what you would obtain is a categorized view of the provinces. What I was interested in seeing was to categorize according to a different color every province that was not obviously Italy. And you will see that the only province that's not characterized as a feature is actually Italy, which is not technically a Roman province. Let's say it has a special status here. And everything else is visualizable according to the different color. And obviously in the layers panel, it will show you the color code so that you do not get confused in that. But of course, if you have, the real fun in this case comes when you have chronological data, for example. So in this view, I differentiated the symbols and the colors according to the emperor to which a certain amphitheater was certainly associated. And obviously, if you go to the layers panel here, and you will be able to select the values that you want to see and to take out everything else. In this case, I eliminated everything that was more generic, like the indication of the century, for example. And then I tried with the centuries. But what was actually very interesting to me was to see that there is a lot of amphitheaters that are identified as imperial without any particular association to an emperor. So they are actually much more than the ones that are identified with a certain emperor. Of course, if you have numerical data in your file, you will also be able to categorize the view according to those particular data. So in this case, I tried a categorized view according to the capacity that was described for the amphitheaters. And you can, again, categorize the view according to the size of the symbol that can be proportional to, in this case, the capacity, the value, or according to the color again. And then you can also try to play with some more advanced geometry options, which will be more or less rough according to the precision of the data that you have. Generally, it will not be extremely precise, but it will allow you to see something if you're interested in isolating certain types of views. This is a combination, this is the result of an analysis that comes from combining an application that's called Voronoi polygons and the convex hulls. Basically, what it does is to isolate the regional areas that a specific algorithm has according to the density of the points that are on the map. So what it does is basically to retrieve automatically regional areas from what it understands, basically, of your own data. And this may be useful in a way, and it also helps you to understand boundaries of regions that go beyond the simple political identification, which I think is particularly useful sometimes. Of course, it will be particularly rough in terms of precision in the definition of the boundaries, especially if you had to do with undefined data somehow. So you can see, for example, that in the northern part of this map, it actually has no boundaries. So the identification of the regions will go up in the map endlessly because it cannot understand, it hasn't any data to understand where those regions actually end. So once again, you have to look at this critically, and you can also play around with it and see if you can improve the view in a certain way. So as I promised, there is another application that you may be interested in viewing and exploring if QGIS is too cumbersome or too slow for you, which is Carto.com. And if you, by any chance, saw one of the previous sessions of the previous semester on Sunoikisis, it was one where Tom Elliott actually explained a few things about how to use Carto. The problem with the new Carto is that it has a new interface. So it may be not exactly intuitive to understand at first sight. But on the other hand, it has some advantages for people who do not particularly like to have an application installed on their computers. So basically, the concept of Carto, it is a web application. So you just log in with your own GitHub or Google credentials, and you will be immediately redirected to your own profile. And you will be able to build a map from a data set, which is another way to say that you need to upload a CSV or a KML file. You can also play around with their own particular data sets if you want, and those are especially complex kinds of files. So you will have to connect the data set to Carto. You will have to browse it. And the good thing about it is that it is pretty quick in giving you all of the features that I described from QGIS. But you really have to know where to find things. So for example, if you want to have a categorized view, as I showed, according to the capacity of the amphitheaters, what you will need to do is to go on the style section of the little layers panel here that will be automatically produced with the map. And you will need to set the style according to the value that is shown in your file. So you will need to know that in Carto, each column is called as a value, and so on. So you will need to play with it a bit in order to understand how it interprets the data. But it basically allows you to do the same things as QGIS. Another cool thing that you can do is to create, with the same style window, a heat map, for example, where you will be able to change the filling colors, to categorize the filling colors, and to modify the resolution, again, according to what you precisely want to see. You can also be a little bit more creative and do an animated heat map, for example. But this doesn't really make any sense for the Roman amphitheaters. But if you have a narration where places are put in succession for a precise narrational reason, then you may be interested to see how the animation gives that kind of chronological idea. Another interesting thing that you can do is to add the widgets. And to go to the widgets, you will go to the initial part of the layers panel here, and you will click on Add Widget. And it will open for you this little window here, which basically retrieves the data that come from each column in your file. And this will allow you to do, again, in a slightly simpler way than in QGIS, that kind of cartographic view that I mentioned before, by clicking on this little blue circle here for each category, you will be able to have an automatically categorized view of everything, which you will be always able to modify according to the style, according to what you want to give importance to, and so on. So you can do that with the province. You can do that with the regions in Italy. That's, again, a different idea. You will be able to do that for the periods, as I did for QGIS. And again, you will be able to isolate specific categories of space or chronology and so on. Another nice thing is that you will be able to add some pop-ups there, which you can choose, for which you can choose what you want to see again. If you're interested in seeing, I don't know, the labels, you can have a pop-up with the labels. Here I decided to put the identifiers and priorities and so on. Probably the most useful thing here, and you will realize that if you play around with your spatial data a bit, is that Carto allows you to modify directly your files, which QGIS doesn't for obvious reasons. So by going onto your data set, your connected data set, you will be able to modify the content of the columns, to add new columns, to add new rows, and so on. If you realize at a certain point that you need other data, basically, and if you need to copy another column that comes from another data set, for example, if you need to merge data sets, then you will need to modify that directly on Carto, and then you can modify that on the map, which is very useful. And it will happen more often than you can think. So I don't think that Marcel is here yet. So since we promised that we would have given an introductory view on the visualization of Recogito, I thought that it might be useful to remember that Recogito itself offers you some options in terms of visualization that may be useful in a way. So for example, I actually wanted to present you this map, which is the resulting map from a geotagging experiment that one of my students did on the description of Crete in Strabo, in Strabo's geography. And this is the resulting map. As you can see, one of the last features that was added to Recogito was the possibility of visualizing the spatial extent for spatial entities that are recognized as provinces, for example. And those coordinates, those visualizations, are retrieved from the specific gazetteers, which is already a very interesting option. And of course, on Recogito itself, you can have an idea about, for example, frequency in the mentions of specific entities, because depending on the big bubbles that you have here on the sides, you will have an idea of what's mentioned more frequently and what's mentioned the least frequently. And of course, you will be able to contextualize the annotations immediately. This is a section of the project that Marcel was supposed to show you. So let's give him credit for doing this. He actually tried to map all the spatial references in a series of very important inscriptions that's called the Athenian private lists. And so he associated every place that was mentioned there with a place, a physical place and the reference in a gazetteer. And by having that map and by clicking on each bubble here, on each circle, you will always be able to jump to the original context in the text and to have an idea of how many annotations were made of the same reference to that text. It will always give you an idea about the gazetteer to which that place was referred to, and it will give you the authority name, a short description that's retrieved from the gazetteer, and the chronological span where that name is attested for that particular location. So this is the resulting map for one of the inscriptions that Marcel was showing us earlier, the Athenian private lists. All right, I think that we are good to go now. And I would like to hear questions, but first of all, I would like to show you the exercise that we planned for this section here, which you can find in the syllabus here. It looks very scary, but it's actually the reproduction of what I showed you through QGIS. You can choose between the 3 datasets that we suggested. You can look for additional datasets in Trismegistus places if you want, or you can try to listen to our previous session about geotagging and tag your text in the Cogito and then try to represent that on QGIS on your own. So basically, there is a very specific and detailed list of what you're supposed to do in order to prepare your data, to load your data, and to symbolize, to categorize the data. Once again, there is no golden standard here, and there is no one that will be able to tell you what you have to see from your data. It really depends on what you particularly want to do, on how well you know your sources. And it may happen that you realize that your sources do not tell you anything particular. So you may want to get into that kind of recursive process that requires you to go back to the data and to add further features, further kinds of classifications and so on. And then you will be pretty much involved in the loop of geotagging and geospatial analysis, much more than if you were working with predefined data. So, questions?
Okay, Chiara, Valeria, thank you very much. Unfortunately, for technical reasons, Marcel Mernitz was not able to join us, but you have shown us these tools for the visualization, and thank you also for showing the map of the Athenian tribute list, which is actually quite interesting, and considering the difficulty of this epigraphical text, I think that this map is really very useful to see in some way the Athenian Empire at the time. But now, questions. We have people in the Hangout, so please, questions for Chiara and Valeria.
So Anisa is asking how many columns of data is possible to show with the software? Unlimited, I think. It's really not about the number of columns or lines. You're welcome.
Another question?
I have a question for Valeria, if it's possible. Now, I think it applies to several linked open data applications. I wonder if you have any user experience of people saying, well, nice, I use the Peripleo tool, but I am not very sure what is in there. What databases are included? What do they have really? So I am not very sure how I can interpret the results I get.
Yeah, this is a very legitimate question. For all your queries, you always see what are the databases that are involved in your results. So you can always break down the results by data sources. If you're asking, if it is possible to know, let's say from the beginning, what are all the data sets, what are all the contributors to Peripleo? Yes, that it would be relatively easy, and maybe, I'll take your feedback as a suggestion to make that information more easily available when the new version of Peripleo will be released. Something like, I don't know, a contributor list. But of course, when you search for something, you cannot know, before the searching what you will find and what will be, the data contributor that will be involved in your specific query. But surely we can make it public. Who are all our contributors? For the moment, I can definitely say Pelagios, the IDI, the data, the Digital Atlas of the Roman Empire. We have data from Trismegistus as well, the epigraphic Heidelberg database, the Numismatic Society, and well, quite a few. But we will make available the whole list.
Exactly. That's a suggestion to gain a little bit more transparency, and if somebody wants to be able to go back and follow where these linked data come from and eventually evaluate what he or she finds out. Thank you.
Yeah, that is always going back to the original data source. That is always possible. All the results in Peripleo have a link to the original. If it's a place, it has a link to the gazetteer. If it is, an object, it has a link to the database. For each result, there is a link to the data source.
That's also a question that could be answered visually, isn't it? In the interface, you could say, okay, for numismatics.org, what is the geographic extent, at least, of the results you find, and for any given data set. So you can see this data set only gives me things from the Eastern Mediterranean. This data set gives me things from right across Eurasia. This data set, and that would be one way of answering that question.
I think that you could actually do that with the older version of Peripleo, so I'm quite sure that we will have that feature for a new one.
Yeah, I expect so.
Okay, thank you for this discussion. Other questions? Okay, well, I think we have some points. So, thank you again, Chiara and Valeria. So, of course, if I can say that geo-annotation is a full topic, of course. And well, we have the tools now. We begin to have the data. Of course, we need more data, but fortunately, we have the tools now. So this is good because both for scholars and students, they can start working on that. So this is really good. So I think that, okay, we can finish this session. Yes, we still have a few minutes, but I don't think there are other questions. So next week we have our last session for this long semester. So I thank you all for participating in the Google Hangouts every week, and of course our guests, our coordinators, and of course Chiara and Valeria have been contributing to SunoikisDC since the beginning, and they have been teaching many sessions. So really thank you. Okay, so see you next week, next Thursday, for the last session about topic modeling. Again, you will see the class outline in GitHub, and then we will talk about maybe future programs for Sunoikisis, and we will have another Sunoikisis, of course, in the fall. But as for now, thank you again. See you next week, and goodbye and good night.